Jeffrey Epstein as an intel asset, who was he an intel asset for?
I'm big on the particulars of the word because asset, I think, is throwing a wrench into the entire investigation. The specific words of Alex Acosta, the prosecutor who cut the sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein in 2007, 2008, was later quoted as saying that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence,
Mm.
and that's why and to leave it alone, and it was above his pay grade. And there's a distinction between being a intelligence asset and belonging to intelligence. And the reason I bring this up and stress this is because this phrase asset actually has a technical meaning, which includes having a human intelligence 201 file that when you say that, that means that they can deny links to intelligence by saying he's not an asset. If you understand what I'm saying, like for example, Pam Bondi was asked at the press briefing in the White House last week, was Epstein an intelligence asset? And she said, I don't know. We're looking into it. I'll get back to you. Alex Acosta was reportedly asked by the Justice Department Office of Professional Responsibility, do you have knowledge that Epstein was an intelligence asset? And this word allows them to say no, even if Epstein was working with intelligence. And this gets to like kind of the central point about how I see the case around Epstein, both on the U.S., the Israeli, the Saudi, the British, the French, all of these sides of this sort of complex web of international intelligence alliances, which is that I believe that Epstein's role vis-a-vis intelligence is as a financial facilitator, so that deals are brokered to advance activities that the US government wants done but does not want to be seen as brokering. And there's a
Mm.
long history of this being done, and most times such figures are not formally classified as intelligence assets. They are known as witting cooperative contacts or liaisons or facilitators or friends of the station. That is how they will be referred to in CIA cables, in intelligence traffic, and that is a different thing than an asset who is recruited and who works for the agency in some capacity. What financial fixers do, and I can go over examples of this, is they broker deals and they arrange for financing in a discreet fashion because they have access to donor pools or they have access to individuals that the U.S. government does not want to have formal diplomatic negotiations with, and they back channel these agreements and but they do so willingly. They do so not because they work for example, the CIA or for Israeli intelligence. They do so because they have connections on both sides of the equation, as well as with other potential partners in the deal, and they themselves profit from doing it, and so they act as a middleman. And I did a 4-hour stream on this last night for my ex subscribers. And I went through all these different examples of this, but I think a useful case study to keep in mind, both for the Justice Department investigating this issue and for the lay audience to understand how you can simultaneously be working with intelligence but not working for intelligence, is the case of Bruce Rappaport in the 1980s with the Ronald Reagan White House and the Ronald Reagan Justice Department and the Ronald Reagan CIA. There was a scandal around an Iraqi pipeline that was being built through Jordan, and the CIA, the National Security Council, and the White House all wanted this Iraqi pipeline to be built. There was a major CI contractor, a U.S. company called Bechtel, that was going to make $1 billion off of building this pipeline. The Secretary of State had formerly been the vice chairman of Bechtel, and the Attorney General had a close friend who was in on the deal as well. The main issue is that Iraq wanted to build this pipeline, Jordan wanted to build this pipeline, the U.S. wanted to build this pipeline, but there were intense concerns that Israel might attack the pipeline because of the way it might change the economic integration strategy in the Middle East during a sensitive time when Iran had just done the Iranian Revolution. And there were concerns that Israel might sabotage that project. And so Bechtel, uh, Iraq, Jordan refused to grant the project base go forward with it until they could secure some sort of Israeli buy-in to the project. Now, the U.S. did not want to formally be seen as backing this project. They wanted it to happen, but they did not want to be seen as making it happen because it could inflame other partners like Turkey, who would be cut out of the deal. So, what they did is they engaged a guy named Bruce Rappaport, who was a Swiss financier with very close ties to the Israeli government, to back channel the agreement with the Israeli government. He was very close with with the prime minister of Israel, Shimon Peres, the head of the Israeli Labor Party, which is significant because Jeffrey Epstein fits this description to a T. He, for example, met with Bill Clinton 17 times in the Bill Clinton White House, and is very close friends with Ehud Barak, the head of the Israeli Labor Party in Israel. And another aspect of it was that Bruce Rappaport was very, very close with the then CIA director, William Casey. They were not only golfing buddies, they had mutually overlapping business interests, and a long history together. Well, look at Bill Burns, the CIA director, for example, for uh, for Joe Biden. Bill Burns met 3 times with Jeffrey Epstein in 2014. First, when Burns was Deputy Secretary of State, but then twice, Bill Burns went to Jeffrey Epstein's New York townhouse as soon as Bill Burns took the reins of the Carnegie Endowment. Now, why would he do that? I don't think Bill Burns, had, a particular knack for underage women for sex trafficking. He wanted money. That's what you go to Epstein for. You go to him to broker deals with the financial network behind Epstein, and this aspect of it. Now, what ended up happening in the background of this is that Bruce Rappaport struck a secret agreement with the Israeli government for, unbeknownst to the world, the Israeli government to have a 30% financial interest in the pipeline in exchange for their promise not to uh, attack it or sabotage it in some way. But that didn't come out until there was a special prosecutor to investigate Ed Meese, the attorney general, because everyone thought the only reason Israel agreed to the deal was because there were bribes to the Israeli Labor Party, and the whole thing had to be kept extremely secret from the government. The CIA refused to turn over files because the White House was trying to get an office that's now called the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation. Back then, it was the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, to put up the money for this deal. But Bruce Rappaport had a very checkered past, just like Jeffrey Epstein. And when the U.S. government agency that was tasked to provide $400 million of insurance to the deal said, "Why are we doing business with this guy? He's got an extremely checkered past." The National Security Council said, "Don't ask any questions. Give the money and then shut up." And so then they went ahead and queried the CIA for all of their files on Bruce Rappaport. And the CIA basically gave a limited hangout response to that. They said, all we have are some collected newspaper clippings that are all open source. And they did not turn over to what's now the Development Finance Corporation, the actual highly sensitive dossier that they had on Bruce Rappaport, including the reason that they had been instrumentalizing him because of his close ties to the government of Israel. But what you have there is a very complicated analysis. In the case of Bruce Rappaport, you don't have some kind of Israeli double agent, who is you have kind of this bilateral intelligence sharing arrangement where Bruce Rappaport he knows people on both sides of the government, and he is playing a sensitive financier role in order to bridge the gap between the U.S. and Israeli government in a way that neither government wants to be seen as publicly doing. And this fits the profile of Epstein on the intelligence side. From Epstein's role, reportedly, but in his own words, his client is one of his first clients when he went out on his own in 1981 was Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi, this is what he said to the press, that his client was Adnan Khashoggi. He said this in 1987. Adnan Khashoggi was the Saudi businessman, the one time reportedly richest man in the world, the richest arms dealer in the world, who was the Saudi businessman who kicked off the Reagan administration's Iran Contra affair. It was Adnan Khashoggi who flew to Washington D.C. to meet with the Reagan National Security Advisor, Robert McFarlane, in order to serve as the broker between the US and the Israelis and the Iranians, in order to have US weapons be shipped to Israel, where the Iranians would purchase it, and then the US would siphon off funds, despite it being illegal to sell arms to Iran because of the arms embargo. This is why it had to be a covert action through the CIA, and then siphon off $16 million of those funds to support another illegal action, supporting the Nicaraguan Contras after that action had been banned by Congress. So they had used Adnan Khashoggi to end run two different illegal activities, which is why it had to be so covert. But even in that case, you had a Saudi intelligence aspect, you had an Israeli intelligence aspect, you had a U.S. authorized covert action, you had UK intelligence on that, and you had back channeling with the Iranians. And so, but that was a client of Jeffrey Epstein, in his own words, as well as the words of many of his close business contacts who said to him as well. So you have, again, there you do not have like a kind of Israeli double agent. You have a joint intelligence operation where this person is brokering the deals in the background. And so it's a complicated analysis in the sense that you can see why the Trump administration would not want full transparency on this, given that there are a significant number of people around Trump world who were involved in those
Mm.
financing networks. But that doesn't mean that they were child sex traffickers. I happen to believe that when it comes to these sort of, you know, um, sexual blackmail allegations on this, I don't personally believe that the people involved in this I don't primarily believe that the blackmail story or the child sex trafficking, side of this is really where people should be looking when it comes to Epstein's intelligence ties. Girls
Mm.
juice deals. Being around Jeffrey Epstein and doing business with Jeffrey Epstein meant access to women at parties, meant access, to women at the various private events. It doesn't necessarily mean a giant, child sex trafficking prostitution ring with formal clients in any sense. And this the intelligence ties. Naftali Bennett, from Israel, just put out a statement yesterday on X saying, you know, uh, Epstein never worked within. I was the prime minister. Mossad reported directly to me, and I can tell you categorically that Jeffrey Epstein did not work for the Israeli government or the Israeli Mossad running a blackmail operation. And I think that's probably true. But notice the carefully worded statement there. It doesn't mean that there was not back channeling with the Israeli government, given that he, had 40 odd reported meetings with Ehud Barak, who stayed at his house, given, the fact that from the start of Epstein's career with Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns, to his work with all matters related to the Iran network throughout the 1980s, to the Les Wexner network in the 1990s, and beyond. That's just getting started. I mean, to say nothing of Ghislaine and Robert Maxwell and much more beyond that. The fact is that is probably true what Naftali Bennett said, but that is also not the full story. And I think part of the issue is if you concede the role of Epstein as a financial facilitator for covert action, and then you validate Alex Acosta's reported statements to the Trump transition team that his utility to intelligence services played into his plea deal for the sex trafficking and prostitution charges, then you can see why this gets schmutz
Mhm.
on both people around Trump world as well as sensitive partners, because I mean, honestly, like a lot of this goes back to something called the Safari Club, which was a off the books, off the shelf, private, self-sustained, private CIA financing operation that was primarily led by French intelligence during the late 1970s, and involved the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Moroccans, and both U.S. and Israeli intelligence were involved in this network, but they were not the senior partners in on it. This network would then essentially snap back to life in a huge way during the Iran Contra affair, and appears to be, especially around Adnan Khashoggi, who reportedly was Epstein's client. And so, you see Epstein's role with the French and Jean-Luc Brunel, and the fact that, he was, Epstein, maintained a residence in France and appeared to hobnob with high-level French government. You don't know who this junior and senior partner is on any particular deal, but what you know is that Epstein had access and he had pools of money, and he was meeting with high-level U.S. government officials in the same way that was done in the Reagan administration, that was done in the Clinton administration. Mark Rich is another figure just like this. Mark Rich, with ties to both the CIA and Israeli intelligence, and ended up getting indicted in a big financial fraud case, and then was pardoned by Bill Clinton his very last day in office in a highly controversial move. But reportedly, if and everyone can look this up, the Mark Rich story runs through these exact same networks as it did in the Bruce Rappaport case, as it did in the Adnan Khashoggi case. The issue is here you have this, it's not just white collar crime. There's a crime that I think was a lot more visceral to the American public. But I think the answer is you got to come clean. And I agree with because I think what Trump is saying here is true. There are going to be a lot of people named in these disclosures who their very name's disclosure is going to make it look like they were involved in some child sex trafficking ring that they weren't.
Yeah.
They were probably involved in the deals, though, and
Mm.
with some awareness of Epstein's kind of strange and disturbing activities. But that could have also been done as part of something that was blessed by the U.S. government. They may have been asked by the special economic activities side of the Central Intelligence Agency to juice this deal, as part of an investor network, and that both it would be good for Israeli national security and good for U.S. national security and good for their own pocketbooks if they went through with this deal. But that would potentially involve disclosing aspects of U.S. Tradecraft
Yeah.
from the 1980s to present that you can see why the national security community might not want public.
Well, Scott Adams had an interesting post a day or two ago in which he said that the president of the United States serves as both the chief executive, obviously overseeing, administering the executive branch. And in that role, he owes his voters maximum transparency, but he also serves as the commander in chief. And you can't have radical transparency as the commander in chief because that signals to your enemies. And Scott Adams was contending that President Trump was deliberately not revealing information that the federal government has about Epstein in his capacity as commander in chief because of what implications that may have on foreign policy or national security. As much as we don't like those vague phrases anymore because those have been abused, I know you have to go in a second, but do you have any idea what you went? Let me rephrase this. You mentioned Bruce Rappaport and that pipeline, that Iraqi pipeline. Do you have any idea of the types of deals that Epstein would have been, this off the books liaison that would have been this connector with different countries and different intel agencies?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if what his reporting was what he told the press is true around Adnan Khashoggi being his client, that happened from 1983 to 1987, 88. If Adnan Khashoggi was a client as of 1987, then that would have put direct aspects of the Iran-Contra affair
Mm.
within that. Notably, who was the cover-up guy for Iran-Contra when he became Attorney General in 1992? That was no less than Bill Barr, the very guy who was in charge of the Justice Department when Jeffrey Epstein died. But then also you can look at all the different, for example, if you wanted to look at the Israeli intelligence side of this, for example, you can look at the various economic integration matters that were done under the Bill Clinton presidency, while Epstein had durable power of attorney over Les Wexner's finances, and all the different companies, like Mast Industries and the like, that helped countries fulfill their economic integration under the U.S. Israeli economic integration zones that were set up, for example, in Africa and parts of the Middle East through this. And there's lots of Epstein financial transactions that overlap with highly sensitive U.S. Israeli economic deal craft, as well as on the Saudi side, as well as on the UK and French side. But I think
Mm.
that Pam Bondi does not necessarily know where to look on this, and I don't think that the Central Intelligence Agency is going to fork over documents that are related but technically non-responsive to the
Right.
query, because so you need to be, direct and know what you're looking for, which is why I say that the first thing that should be done is to get the November 2020 transcript between DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility and Alex Acosta, the Justice Department official who cut that sweetheart deal. We need that full transcript to
Yeah.
see what the DOJ itself asked about Epstein belonging to intelligence. What they didn't ask, we also need to know Bill Barr's role in that investigation. Did Bill Barr try to block OPR from asking certain questions? Did the CIA's Office of General Counsel try to limit queries into Epstein's intelligence communications? Did the CIA run a check within its own network? This is very, very common. You look at the JFK files, you look at any major declassifications, when there is public mainstream reporting that somebody has intelligence ties, it is common practice for the CIA to run a trace request or to run an internal query as to whether or not the mainstream media reporting is true, so that the director of central intelligence can be apprised about whether or not this person reported to have CIA ties in the media actually does. They did this for Jim Jones, the CIA did. They did this for the entire Brown and Root network, the CIA did. They do this constantly whenever there's an allegation in order to see if the allegation is true.
Yeah.
I would be gobsmacked if in 2008 they did not run an internal search about Epstein, and certainly in 2019 when it was the reason Alex Acosta, the cabinet secretary, was forced to resign after reporting that he said Epstein belonged to intelligence, that the CIA did not run an internal check about this.
And there'd be
Those
records of that, right? If they did?
Yes, there would be records
Do
about
you
that.
are you
Oh,
hearing any word from your sources about whether the Acosta interview transcript will be released or not?
I don't know. This is something that, is only about 10 days old since I've made a bit of a campaign of demanding this. And I
Yeah.
know that it can take, there's a lot going on in the world, and there's been back and forth, I think, on the priority list about how responsive the Justice Department wants to be about this. But I do believe that that is the bare minimum. But like I said, all these things can be queried but the CIA is extremely, extremely siloed. You can't just run like one general record search and get everything. You need to know exactly what you're looking for, and this is why these specific records requests have to be immediately submitted to the Office of General Counsel, the CIA, and you really do need a special task force on this thing, because Pam
Who should
Bondi is
head
not.
that? Who should be that special prosecutor? Because I mean, you have to know things like you're saying to even know where to look. And I feel like a lot of the people, with all due respect to some of them and no respect to others, don't know what they're doing.
Well, I think that, for example, Ed Martin is heading this
Mm,
weaponization, task force within DOJ, and this something is something that I think kind of fits into that, weaponization or abuse of intelligence capacities at within DOJ, and you don't need a rocket scientist on this, but you do need a dedicated team to understand the life and times of Epstein, all the different networks he ran through, all the different government activities that were adjacent to it. I don't think this is Pam Bondi doesn't have time with everything else going on
mhm.
to become, a world specialist on this, and to run the dialogue. But what she needs is basically the muscle as the head of the Justice
Yeah.
Department to bless what a task force is doing, and to force the intel agencies and related agencies to comply with
Yeah.
what the task force is asking for. And that's really the structure that has to be set up. So I think if someone around, for example, the Ed Martin weaponization team, were to be able to lead a transparency task force and simply include the Epstein, investigation as part of that, that would allow a day-to-day relationship for queries to the intel side, with while not hamstringing Pam Bondi as this being, her number one task at DOJ.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, first of all, I maintain what I have been saying for the last 10 days. None of this would be a thing to this extent had Pam Bondi told us the truth from the get go and not tried to be a Fox News star and attention seeker. She created this monster. And if I were President Trump, I would want to hold her accountable, because this is now a giant headache for him, especially if what you're saying is true. Especially if there's an additional element, not just the child sex crimes, but an additional intel aspect of this. But I agree with you. We don't want the FBI and the DOJ to not be able to stop criminals and thugs and terrorists who are plotting against us because they are singularly focused on one deep state issue. I know you need to go. Thank you for being here. This was incredibly illuminating, and I appreciate your research. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, 2 things.
Yeah.
First, I did a 4-hour lecture, for my subscribers on X on this exact topic last night in, like, meticulous forensic detail. And just the second thing on Pam Bondi, I don't think Pam Bondi knew what she was walking into with this. I think that she probably expected to be able to conduct a relatively normal investigation, and then as it got deeper into the facts of the case, the complications were probably made, apparent. I think that would have if she had known then what she knows now, I doubt the rollout would have gone exactly the way it did, because I don't think Pam Bondi is an operator the way that Bill Barr was. Bill Barr started his career in the CIA. He told his high school guidance counselor he wanted to run the CIA. His father was in the CIA. He was a lawyer for the CIA, and then he was attorney general twice. Pam, you can't expect Pam Bondi to know all of this. Inheriting the reins for the first time, but the fact is what we're trying to do is educate so that she knows now, so
Mhm.
that there's you can sort of make an excuse for the beginning of this, because this is not the primary job typically of federal law enforcement, but now, so now you can take action. But I do have to jet. But
I
thank
know.
you,
My
Liz, for joining me.
apologies. My apologies to Pasobic. I know I kept you longer than you asked, and now you missed the beginning of his show. So go. Thank you for being here. Mike Ben's more generous than I towards Pam Bondi, of course, but I simply cannot get past, and I think a lot of us share this viewpoint. That all may be true what he said about Pam Bondi, but you don't make a cover sheet that says the most transparent administration in history when there's nothing in the binder. You don't promise dirt from the SDNY when you haven't verified it. Even if you don't know what you're getting into with a certain case, you don't try to make headlines without doing your due diligence. That should be a basic competence litmus test. So all of that being said, listen, this is incredibly illuminating information from Mike Benz. If this is the case, then if what Mike Benz has untangled is the answer to a lot of the unanswered questions about Epstein, I mean, it all makes sense. It's basically two different things then. If what Mike Benz is saying is accurate and he provides the receipts, so let's just operate under the premise that what he's saying is accurate, um, then it's Jeffrey Epstein who committed hideous sex crimes against underage girls, which is awful. And he also served, perhaps separately, as this off the books, off the records, not an official employee of any intel agency, domestic or foreign, but this liaison when there was a financial liaison that was needed between countries, but that the countries needed it to be off the books because they couldn't be officially involved.